Why Ben Hogan's golf swing is the worst golf swing for amateurs to use. What's up, guys? It's your favorite Kiwicoach. Let's go do this thing. Alright guys, so before all the haters go and hit that dislike button and the hate just starts coming in, let me kind of explain what I meant by that previous statement. So when I say it's the worst golf swing for amateurs to use, I'm talking about a few things in his golf swing that he does to prevent a certain miss, which is the hook, that I think a lot of amateurs are not going to benefit from. So keeping that in mind, the first topic of this video, we're going to get into basically an overview of why Ben Hogan created his golf swing, just kind of a little summary of what he used to struggle with, and then what he did to kind of get over that. Now, second part of the analysis, as you guys can see, I have Cameron Champ up here, and we are going to be kind of doing a side-by-side comparison, seeing how these golf swings differ, and kind of basically talking about a little bit of why Cameron Champ's model swing is more so my preference. Alright guys, let's get into it. So first things first, let's get into kind of Ben Hogan. Let's give you guys a little summary, right? So Ben Hogan started his golfing career as a caddy, right? From there, he basically just kind of grew up hitting golf balls on the range. He had some professional golfer influences. I can't really remember the top of my head. You guys can go fact check and look those up if you guys want to. From there, basically, once he started his kind of playing on professional golf career, he really struggled with the hook, okay? So when he first came out on the scene for, I'm not quite sure, fact check me again, maybe like 5 to 7 years, it might have been shorter, a little bit longer. I believe he really struggled with the hooks, right? And he really wasn't living up to his potential because of that, right? So keeping that in mind, everything that Ben Hogan kind of did after that was to get rid of the hook, right? There's a lot of just famous kind of audio clips of him saying that he fought the hook very hard and that he did a lot of stuff in his golf swing to do that, right? So the first thing that we're going to talk about is grip and how he changed his grip to a very weak grip to help him with the hook. Okay, so let's kind of look at that. What is a weak grip? So weak grip still means that the club was ran through the fingers, right, or perpendicular or slightly angled off, right? Still in the fingers, right? We're not talking about in the palms. But what I'm really talking about, once it's in the fingers, let's kind of look at the V's, because that's a really easy point for you guys to kind of pick up on and see what he's doing, right? So if we look at his trail hand V, which is the right hand for him, it's pointing up, basically for him, facing this left part of his neck, right? Which is in a very weak position. If we look at the lead hand, it's going to be kind of matching, right? Somewhere right around there as well, right? That's a very weak placement in terms of the hands being on the golf club. Weak just means that there's a less range of motion, is what I like to call it. So basically the release is kind of this counterclockwise rotation of the wrist. If you place the hands on the golf club a little bit more in a weak position, kind of like this, there's less range of motion, so it's harder to supinate, which basically means it's harder to get the club face closed, basically excessively, is all that really kind of means. That's what a weak grip kind of helps with. So that was his first line of option, right? Second thing from there, as we start seeing him taking it back, we're going to see him at the top of his swing. He's trying to add on something called extension in this lead wrist, right? So extension just means kind of this cupping look. If you take a golf club in your hand and you go like this with your wrist, if you're a right-handed golfer, this would be your left wrist, you're going to see that the club face opens, right, with this little motion right here. So it's another thing to help him make sure that that club face is not going to be pointing left of a path, right? He also got a lot of radial hinge, which also helps with the extension type of look, and it's just kind of a good little way to get rid of a hook, right? It's just getting that club face really open so you can still flip it, basically, is kind of how he thought about carrying it. Now from there as well, we can see if I draw a line on his lead hip, we're going to see that he gets an excessive amount of linear push, like a bunch of linear push, right? Which is pushing, 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 which is also another great way to make sure that you're kind of, if you match that with the weak grip and you're pushing a lot, there's a good chance the golf ball is probably not going to go to the left, right? So he was doing everything in his power to make sure the golf ball doesn't go to the left. Now, that being said, I don't want you guys to get too lost in the hate already. There's a lot of really, really good things in Ben Hogan's golf swing that I think amateurs can benefit from, right? But there are some key differences that he would probably say are some of his secrets to golf, why he got rid of his hook, is basically the argument I'm trying to make in terms of you should not copy a lot of what Ben Hogan does in his golf swing, okay? That is my argument. Now, why Actually, before we do why, let's talk a little bit more about my definition of an amateur golfer in this scenario. My definition of an amateur golfer is basically kind of a beginner to mid-level who struggles with a slice, right? That's a large portion of golfers out there. Just go look at your local driving range. You guys will see a bunch of slicers out there, right? So that's basically my definition of an amateur golfer right now. And that's what I'm using basically to say that the typical amateur golfer should not incorporate what I just talked about in their golf swings, because they're going to slice the ball even more, which will not help them out, right? Cool. Now, that being said, for the haters out there, let's go over what Ben Hogan does really, really well and what I like in his golf swing, because I think you guys might need to hear that as well. Cool. So in terms of setup, obviously he's got a very neutral, I mean, there's obviously, in terms of ball position, I think he's hitting a driver. Clubs were a little bit different back in those days, so setup's gonna be slightly different, but in general, the setup looks very neutral and something that I would teach probably a lot of players, right? That's a take-home point right there. Takeaway, he has that nice little one-piece takeaway. He has lots of width. He's not getting narrow. Basically, the elbows are moving correctly, right? He's not taking his elbow and going into internal rotation super early and getting kind of this look super early. He's gotten a good amount of pronation in the lead wrist. He's not going into the supination, rolling under, or excessively pronating. He pretty much has a pretty traditional takeaway, which is what a lot of players should probably work on. Position 3, he's in a great position here. Down the line, he might be a little flat with the club shaft pitch, but nothing really too crazy. In terms of pivot, this lead knee is starting to kick a little bit internal. This trail side knee is extending. Pelvis line is not dropping too much in the left pelvic tilt and the backswing. I mean, he's doing a lot of great things in his pivot. Maybe a little bit too much radial for my liking. Obviously, way too much extension for the average amateur golfer for my liking as well. But obviously, he was doing that for certain reasons. Downswing, another really good thing that he does is in transition, he's getting that left pelvic tilt, right? That left side of the pelvis is lowering. As he's doing that, he's getting anterior pelvic tilt, or APT. Those two combined basically kind of get the lordosis motion, which is basically that natural curvature of the spine, which sets him up to start rotating once he starts gripping the ground from here, right? So the initiating moves was the LPT, APT kind of lordosis feel. Now he's starting to get into pressure with the ground and starting to create vector forces in certain areas to basically help him rotate and getting him into a really good kind of transition move. Now from here, for my liking, he obviously has a lot more linear push, but what he does, which is very interesting, is he actually gets a lot of external rotation in the lead knee, which helps him get around while he's pushing, which is very uncommon for a lot of players that push as much as he does. Watch his lead knee. We're going to kind of zoom in here. I'll take him back to the top of swing. Watch this lead knee go into external rotation and start getting around. That is amazing for someone who's pushing as much as he is. You don't see that, if ever, with players who push like he does. Like, go look at Rory McIlroy's. Roy gets a little bit of external rotation with that, or external rotation with that lead knee, but nowhere near as much as Hogan does with his slide. I think Roy doesn't slide as much as Hogan, but still, I mean, it's just incredible. And then when we get him up to basically impact, we look at his lead hip. Even though he's slid quite a bit, it's still relatively around here, which is amazing, right? He's actually not as stalled out as a lot of players would be who would push that much. And then from here, obviously, impact is going to look a little bit different, which we're going to get here when we start analyzing Cameron Champ's swing and his swing. But all in all, I mean, obviously a really, really good golf swing and probably one of the best ball strikers of all time, right? Now, whether that be because he had the most optimal swing is another argument we can talk about. I would argue that he doesn't have the most optimal swing. I would argue that he had the most optimal swing for himself as an individual, knowing his certain misses that he always had. I think is more so the question you guys should be asking yourselves, not what is the most optimal swing as a fact for everyone, more so what is the most optimal swing for yourself is usually something I try to ask my students and try to have them figure that out for themselves, right? Because that's the only real way you guys will learn is if you figure it out for yourself. Cool. So let's transition into the next part of the video. We're going to make this a little bit shorter because it's already kind of been somewhat of a lengthy video. Cool. So we're just going to look at impact differences between Ben Hogan and Cameron Champ, right? Which is more the modern swing. Now, albeit I know the golf club technology was different, golf ball was different, so moves and impacts are going to be slightly different. But keeping that in mind, we're going to just go briefly over a little bit of a difference between releases of these two players. And I think a lot of the differences in release patterns had to do with what they were doing with their wrists at the top of the swing. And we'll kind of get into that a little bit. Cool. So if we take a look at Ben Hogans, we can see that his lead wrist, if anything, it's pretty flat here, or if anything, maybe a smidgen extension at impact with this driver, or just after impact, technically probably a couple frames after it. So he's already kind of starting to get into that extension. If we look at Cameron Champ, if you guys have watched my analysis of him, the previous video, you'll know that his lead wrist is still in flexion at this point, which is incredible, right? So he's still almost taking off loft and driving it. From here, we can almost see Ben Hogan's trail side wrist is a lot flatter than Cameron's. I know both the cameras are very blurry, but you can still kind of see basically the basis of the difference, right? Cameron's more like this at that position. Hogan's a little bit more this way, if anything. Not like an amateur, right? He's not like this, which is great, but he's still definitely nowhere near that, is kind of the main point I want you guys to get from that. Now, my argument, the main reason why they're different has to do with their wrist angles at the top. Hogan, I think, had a little bit more extension in that lead wrist before transition, as well as a weak grip. And then Cameron obviously has a little bit more of a neutral or strong grip. And then if anything, Cameron's getting a little bit of flexion in transition, right? So their release patterns through the ball are a little bit different. Plus, Cameron's not pushing as much as well, right? Cool, guys. So that's pretty much all I wanted to talk about in this analysis. Again, hopefully you guys, you haters who stuck around, who love Ben Hogan, are starting to kind of get some major takeaway points. Again, I think for the average amateur out there who hits a slice, because that is the average amateur, that taking home Ben Hogan's grip, wrist conditions, and his move into the golf ball, I think is going to be a combination of disaster for a lot of you guys out there. So there's no point, or there's really no reason for you guys to try to emulate his golf swing in its entirety. I would take small little points here and there from it. But again, if you are an average amateur and you hit a slice, do not try to copy Ben Hogan's swing. If you do it, make sure you go to a golf instructor that knows what they're talking about. They're not going to teach you his grip. They're definitely not going to teach you his wrist conditions at the top, right? And depending on the instructor and what their philosophy is, they might not teach you the bump or not, right? So that's all kind of relative. It doesn't really matter. So anyways, average amateurs, do not copy Ben Hogan's swing. Go get a lesson from a local pro that knows what they're talking about. All right, guys, so if you haven't already, feel free, smash that like button. Let me know how we're doing. Leave a comment, which was when I was supposed to say, let me know how we're doing. So let me know how we're doing. And then, as always, hit that little red subscribe button down there. All right, guys, best of luck and play some golf out there.